For many, there is no issue more important than childhood education. Among them, the former British Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. He's now a United Nations Special Envoy for Education. He explained why the issue is so critical in an interview with CCTV's Karina.
Education unlocks just about everything else. If you're a country that is in poverty, you need education to escape poverty. If you're an individual, if you're looking for opportunity, you need education. The better educated a girl is, the more chances she has of having a safe pregnancy or avoiding HIV/AIDS or avoiding maternal mortality. So education is, in a sense, the key to everything else that we're trying to do to relieve poverty, to deal with health inequalities, to tackle the environment and to build stronger economies. And the problem is that we have neglected education both as an investment and neglected the rights of children.
Now, you mentioned that we haven't really paid that much attention to education. It was one of the Millennium Development Goals. And the goal was that by 2050, no child anywhere in the world would be denied access to a primary school education. It's 2016 now. We see that in developing countries, 91% of the children are in primary school.
That's right.
Yet there are still 57 million children worldwide who are not in school. So given this, do you look at the second goal of the MDGs as a success or a failure?
A success in that about 40 million children who would not otherwise have been in school went to school. So these are huge numbers. Children brought into education because we committed ourselves to spend more money in education. But in the last few years, partly because of the global financial crisis, partly because attention has shifted elsewhere to the treatment of refugees generally, and partly because health has been capable, because of its breakthroughs of gaining more resources from the international community, education aid has been reduced.
I want to get back to those 57 million children around the world. Where are they, the geography? What does their future look like?
Well, half of them are in Africa. And in some countries like Nigeria, the figure is 10 million children out of school. So that's a very high proportion in a country that is essentially a middle-income country that should and could do better. You're talking about a problem that is concentrated in Africa and in the Indian subcontinent. But of course, there is another dimension to it that has almost been a problem that has developed even to greater numbers in the last few years, and that is the number of children who are displaced.
Speaking of conflict, Syria, UNICEF has said that the conflict there has reversed 10 years of progress in education for Syrian children, and there are now between 2 and 3 million Syrian children who are not in school. What are the particular challenges in educating children of conflict?
For most of these children who are refugees, they are not in school. We have tried with a proposal in Lebanon, which is called double shift schools, where you have the children educated who are the local children at the same classroom in the morning and the Syrian children in the afternoon. And we've got about 200,000 children into school under that system. Turkey is now moving forward to try and get more children into school, and so is Jordan. But we have a gap that has got to be bridged. And the reason we cannot do it is not that there's no classrooms or schools and not that there's no teachers. The reason is we don't have the finance. They're putting the money into food and shelter, which of course is the right thing to do. But at the same time, they're not recognizing that if children are out of school for a long period of time, then they may never go back to school. And there may be some children now who will never have a day in the classroom simply because they're in child labour. Some of them are going to be married off as child brides. Many of them have been trafficked, and some of them are drawn into child militias. So we have to do something about this lost generation of children.
If Syria does rebuild itself and many of these families return to Syria, what will it mean for Syria economically if there is a lost generation?
Well, it's very interesting because one of the children I met in Beirut when I was there, and I was asking, as you do when you go around the refugee centres, what they want to do if they had the chance to do it. And he said he wanted to be an engineer, and I said, engineer? And he said, yes, I want to go back and rebuild Syria. So Syria will need these skills. They need the skills of teachers, of professional workers, of doctors, of nurses. And of course, if we don't train these children, then Syria's future economic development is going to be held back, not just because of a war, but because of the aftermath of war, when so little resources and so little has been done to prepare for reconstruction.
Does a solution lie in funding, or is it about coming up with better approaches? Because we've seen in many countries that even if you continue to fund education, it doesn't necessarily give you better results.
I think there's evidence that up to a certain point, getting a child into school, giving a child the chance to learn, that money is not wasted. It may be that in certain areas, and it must be true, that there's going to be greater efficiency and greater emphasis on quality and on standards and on making sure that the teaching is of the highest quality. But when it comes to the basics of getting a child into school, it does make a difference.
Throughout history, there have been massive conflicts. The Second World War, when we had the atom bomb, people were afraid we were going to blow each other up. Every generation seems to have a doomsday fear. But are you still optimistic?
Of course I'm optimistic, because I think the moral sense is something that is improving all the time. I'm optimistic that the young people that are growing up today will want to see themselves not just as citizens of a small community or citizens of their own country, which is important for identity, but they want to see themselves as citizens of the world. The problem is that our international institutions, in dealing with these global problems, whether it's climate change or financial instability, or whether it's terrorism or whether it's migration, our global institutions are not adequate to the challenges that we face. Most of the institutions we're dealing with were built in 1945 to 1950. They were built for problems that are 70 years old. They didn't grow up in an age which was as interdependent and as interconnected as the one that we're in, and they've got to modernize and reform to reflect that changing world.